She was the most photographed woman in the world. Her smile could light up Times Square. Her voice could make grown men weep. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a movie star. She was a phenomenon that defined an entire era of American glamour. But on August 5, 1962, at just 36 years old, the brightest star in Hollywood's galaxy suddenly went dark. The official story, an accidental overdose. The reality, one of the most controversial and mysterious deaths in Hollywood history. Filled with contradictions, cover-ups, and questions that remain unanswered over 60 years later. Tonight, we're diving deep into those final 24 hours. We'll examine the evidence, explore the theories, and uncover details that the official investigation may have overlooked. Was it really an accident? Was someone trying to silence her? Or was there something far darker at play? If you love uncovering the hidden stories of Hollywood legends, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more true stories from history's greatest stars. Now, let's step back in time to August 4th, 1962, the beginning of Marilyn's final day. Before we dive into that fateful night, we need to understand who Marilyn Monroe really was in the summer of 1962, because the woman the world saw on screen was vastly different from the troubled soul behind closed doors. Born Norma Jean Mortensen in 1926, she had endured a childhood marked by foster homes, mental illness in her family, and deep-seated abandonment issues. By 1962, despite her incredible success, those wounds had never fully healed. Professionally, she was at a crossroads. Her last completed film, The Misfits, had been both a critical disappointment and a box office failure. Her marriage to playwright Arthur Miller had crumbled during its production. She was fighting for respect as a serious actress while being typecast as the dumb blonde. But it wasn't just her career that was in turmoil. In 1962, Marilyn was battling severe depression, anxiety, and what we'd now recognize as borderline personality disorder. She was heavily dependent on a cocktail of prescription medications, barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake up, and various tranquilizers to get through the day. Her primary physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg, would later admit he was treating her for acute anxiety and depression. She was also seeing psychiatrist Dr. Ralph Greenson 3 to 4 times a week, an unusually intensive schedule that suggests she was in significant psychological distress. And then there were the rumors. Whispers of affairs with the most powerful men in America. President John F. Kennedy, his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. These weren't just Hollywood gossip. These were potential national security risks in the middle of the Cold War. By August 1962, Marilyn Monroe was a woman under enormous pressure from every direction. Her career was faltering, her personal life was in shambles, her mental health was deteriorating, and she may have been carrying secrets that could topple governments. This was the Marilyn Monroe who woke up on August 4th, 1962. Not the glamorous icon the world knew, but a deeply troubled woman on the edge of a precipice. Saturday, August 4th, 1962. Began like many others at 12,305 Fifth Helena Drive in Brentwood. Marilyn's modest hacienda-style home, the first she'd ever owned, sat quietly in the upscale Los Angeles neighborhood. According to housekeeper Eunice Murray, who had been staying overnight to help care for Marilyn, the star woke up around 10 a.m. This was actually early for Marilyn, who often struggled with insomnia and would sleep well into the afternoon. What we know about this day comes from multiple sources: phone records, witness testimonies, and later police interviews. But here's where the story gets complicated. Many of these accounts contradict each other, sometimes dramatically. The morning started with phone calls. Marilyn spoke with several people, including her half-sister, Bernice Miracle, in Florida. Bernice would later tell investigators that Marilyn sounded despondent and mentioned she was tired of everything. Around noon, Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, arrived for what was supposed to be a routine session. But this wasn't routine at all. Greenson would later tell police he was very concerned about Marilyn's state of mind and had decided to visit her at home rather than wait for their scheduled appointment. What did they discuss during this session? Greenson was vague with investigators, citing doctor-patient privilege. But we do know he stayed for several hours, much longer than a typical session. The afternoon brought more phone calls. Marilyn spoke with her publicist, Pat Newcomb, who had spent the previous night at the house, According to Murray, there was tension between Marilyn and Newcomb. They had argued about something, and Newcomb left the house visibly upset around 1 p.m. Here's where things get really interesting. Phone records show multiple calls to and from Marilyn's house throughout the afternoon and evening. Some of these calls were to New York, some to Washington, D.C., but the specific numbers and times have been the subject of intense debate for decades. One of the most significant calls was supposed to be to Peter Lawford, JFK's brother-in-law and a member of the famous Rat Pack. Lawford later claimed Marilyn called him around 7:30 p.m., sounding groggy and strange. She allegedly said, "Say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to Jack, and say goodbye to yourself because you're a nice guy." But here's the problem. Lawford's story changed multiple times over the years. In some versions, he called her, in others, she called him. The time varied. The exact words were different each time he told it. By evening, according to housekeeper Eunice Murray, Marilyn was in her bedroom. Murray said she served Marilyn dinner in bed, something light, as Marilyn rarely ate much. They chatted briefly about redecorating plans for the house. Around 8 p.m., Murray says she noticed a light under Marilyn's bedroom door and decided not to disturb her. This seemed normal. Marilyn often read late into the night, trying to combat her chronic insomnia. But what was really happening behind that bedroom door? Who was Marilyn talking to during those mysterious phone calls, and why do so many of the witness accounts from this day contradict each other? As Saturday night deepened into Sunday morning, the events that would shock the world were already in motion. The question is, were they an accident, or was something far more sinister unfolding in that modest Brentwood home? According to the official timeline, it was 3 a.m. on August 5th, when housekeeper Eunice Murray first noticed something was wrong. Murray later told police she had gotten up to use the bathroom when she noticed the light still on under Marilyn's bedroom door. She knocked. No response. She knocked again. Louder. Still nothing. But here's the first major inconsistency in the official story. Murray said the door was locked from the inside, which was unusual. Marilyn rarely locked her bedroom door. So Murray went outside and looked through the bedroom window. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. Marilyn was lying face down on the bed, completely nude, clutching the telephone in one hand. Her body was in an unnatural position, and she was clearly not breathing. Murray immediately called Dr. Ralph Greenson, Marilyn's psychiatrist. Notice, she didn't call 911. She didn't call the police. She called the psychiatrist first. Arrived around 3:40 a.m., according to his later testimony. He broke the bedroom window to get inside the same window Murray had looked through. But wait, if Murray could see Marilyn through the window, why didn't Greenson just look through it to confirm what Murray had seen? Why break it immediately? Dr. Greenson found Marilyn exactly as Murray had described. He checked for vital signs, found none, and then, in another puzzling decision, called Dr. Hyman Engelberg, Marilyn's personal physician, instead of immediately calling the police or paramedics. Dr. Engelberg arrived around 4 a.m. Only then, after both doctors had examined the scene, did they finally call the police. The call was logged at 4:25 a.m., more than an hour after Murray claims she first discovered the body. The first police officers arrived at 4:35 a.m., followed shortly by detectives and the coroner's office. What they found was a scene that would generate controversy for decades. Marilyn was lying prone on her bed, her face buried in a pillow. Her legs were straight, her arms by her sides. The phone was indeed in her hand, though some witnesses said it was next to her hand. The room was neat, almost pristine, no signs of a struggle or disturbance. On the nightstand were multiple prescription bottles, some empty. The labels showed various barbiturates, tranquilizers, and sleeping pills, all prescribed by her doctors in the weeks leading up to her death. But here's what struck investigators as odd. The bottles were arranged very neatly. For someone who had taken a fatal overdose, either accidentally or intentionally, wouldn't there be some signs of distress, spilled pills, knocked over water glass, something? Deputy Coroner Thomas Noguchi would later perform the autopsy. His preliminary findings were startling. Marilyn had consumed enough Nembutal, a powerful barbiturate, to kill 3 people, along with a significant amount of chloral hydrate, another sedative. But here's the mystery within the mystery. There were no pill residues found in her stomach. None, if she had taken all these pills orally. As the official story suggested, there should have been remnants in her digestive system. So what really happened during those missing hours? Why did it take over an hour to call the police? Why was the scene so pristine? And how did massive amounts of drugs get into Marilyn's system without leaving any trace in her stomach? The official investigation was about to begin, but already, the inconsistencies were piling up when the Los Angeles Police Department began their investigation on the morning of August 5th. They thought they were dealing with a straightforward case, a troubled movie star who had accidentally overdosed on sleeping pills. They were wrong. Lead detective Robert Byron and his team immediately noticed discrepancies in the witness statements. Housekeeper Eunice Murray's story, in particular, kept changing with each interview. In her first statement to police, Murray said she discovered the body at 3 a.m., but when pressed for details, she later changed this to midnight. Then she changed it back to 3 a.m. When asked why she had waited so long to call for help, her answers were evasive and contradictory. Dr. Greenson's testimony was equally puzzling. He claimed he rushed over immediately when Murray called, but phone records suggested there might have been a delay. He also couldn't adequately explain why he broke the window instead of having Murray unlock the door from inside, because the bedroom door, investigators discovered, could be unlocked from the outside using a thin object like a bobby pin. The physical evidence presented its own mysteries. The bedroom was spotless. Too spotless for someone who had died from an overdose. Investigators noted that the bedsheets were fresh and clean, the pillows perfectly arranged except for where Marilyn's head had been. But the real bombshell came from Deputy Coroner Thomas Noguchi's autopsy. His findings were so unusual that they would fuel conspiracy theories for decades. First, as mentioned, there were no pill fragments in Marilyn's stomach, despite the massive amount of barbiturates in her bloodstream. Second, the concentration of nembutal in her blood was 4.5 milligrams %, a lethal dose that was 3 times higher than what would typically be fatal. Third, there were 8 milligrams % of chloral hydrate in her blood, another, potentially lethal amount. Noguchi consulted with toxicologists and other medical experts. Their consensus was disturbing. The drugs had to have been absorbed through the intestines or administered rectally. There was simply no other way to explain the blood concentrations without stomach residue. This finding opened up terrifying possibilities. If Marilyn hadn't swallowed the pills that killed her, how did they get into her system? The police interviewed everyone who had contact with Marilyn in her final days. Pat Newcomb, her publicist, admitted to the argument, but was vague about what it concerned. Peter Lawford's story about the phone call kept changing. Dr. Greenson cited patient confidentiality for many questions. Perhaps most intriguingly, investigators requested Marilyn's phone records for August 4th and 5th. What they discovered would later become one of the most controversial aspects of the case. The records showed numerous calls to Washington, D.C. and New York throughout the day and evening. Some numbers belonged to the Justice Department. Others couldn't be immediately identified. But here's the shocking part. Within days of the police requesting these records, they mysteriously vanished from the telephone company's files. The official explanation was routine disposal, but the timing was highly suspicious. Several potential witnesses later claimed they were pressured not to talk to investigators. Neighbors who might have seen unusual activity at Marilyn's house reported visits from men claiming to be federal agents. Some said they were warned to keep quiet for national security reasons. Despite all these irregularities, the official investigation concluded on August 17th, just 12 days after Marilyn's death. The ruling, probable suicide due to acute barbiturate poisoning, probable suicide, not definite, not accidental overdose, probable suicide, a conclusion that satisfied no one and explained nothing about the numerous inconsistencies in the evidence. The case was officially closed, but the questions were just beginning. And some people were determined to find answers, no matter where they led. Within days of Marilyn Monroe's death being ruled a probable suicide, alternative theories began to emerge. Some were wild speculation, others were based on disturbing facts that the official investigation had glossed over. The most persistent theory involves the Kennedy brothers, President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. By 1962, rumors of Marilyn's affairs with both men were circulating in Hollywood and Washington circles. The evidence for these relationships is actually substantial. Peter Lawford, JFK's brother-in-law, had introduced Marilyn to the president. FBI files, released decades later under the Freedom of Information Act, contain references to these relationships and the security concerns they raised. Marilyn had been seen at parties where JFK was present. She had visited the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. Most famously, she had sung Happy Birthday, Mr. President at Madison Square Garden in May 1962, in a performance so sultry that JFK's wife Jackie reportedly refused to attend. But it was Robert Kennedy who may have been more deeply involved. Multiple witnesses placed him in Los Angeles on August 4, 1962, the day Marilyn died. The official White House logs show he was supposed to be in San Francisco, but several credible sources claimed he was actually in LA. According to this theory, by August 1962, both Kennedy brothers were trying to distance themselves from Marilyn. The affair with JFK had become too risky politically, and Robert Kennedy had been tasked with ending both relationships permanently. Marilyn, feeling abandoned and betrayed, was threatening to go public. She allegedly kept detailed diaries of her relationships with both men, including intimate details that could have destroyed their political careers and compromised national security. Here's where it gets interesting. Multiple people, including Marilyn's friend and photographer Milton Green, claimed she kept extensive diaries and notes, but when police searched her house after her death, no diaries were found. They had vanished. The theory suggests that Robert Kennedy came to Marilyn's house on August 4th to retrieve these diaries and convince her to remain silent. When she refused, the confrontation escalated. Some versions of this theory suggest Marilyn was killed accidentally during this confrontation, perhaps given an overdose of sedatives to calm her down that proved fatal. Others suggest it was deliberate murder disguised as suicide. A more elaborate version involves the CIA and organized crime. In this scenario, Marilyn's knowledge of government secrets, potentially including CIA plots against Cuba and connections to the mafia, made her a national security risk that had to be eliminated. There were indeed connections between Marilyn, the Kennedys, and organized crime figures. Sam Giancana, the powerful Chicago mob boss, had business relationships with people in Marilyn's circle and was allegedly involved in CIA plots against Fidel Castro. The theory suggests that when the Kennedy brothers tried to crack down on organized crime, the mafia retaliated by killing Marilyn and framing it as suicide, knowing it would emotionally devastate the Kennedys and potentially expose their affairs. Supporters of conspiracy. Theories point to several pieces of evidence suggesting a cover-up: the missing phone records, the delay in calling police, the pristine condition of the death scene, the missing diaries, the mysterious method of drug delivery that bypassed the stomach entirely. Several witnesses came forward over the years with claims that support conspiracy theories. Ambulance driver Walter Schaefer claimed he was called to Marilyn's house around midnight and that she was still alive when they arrived, contradicting the official timeline entirely. Private investigator Fred Otash claimed he had bugged Marilyn's house and recorded conversations between her and Robert Kennedy on the day she died. Several neighbors reported seeing unusual activity around Marilyn's house on August 4th, including black government cars and men in suits. But here's the challenge with conspiracy theories. They often require vast numbers of people to remain silent for decades. Police officers, coroners, doctors, government officials, witnesses, all keeping the same secret for over 60 years. While some aspects of these theories are compelling, others strain credibility. The question becomes, which elements might contain kernels of truth and which are the products of paranoid speculation? What we need to do is examine the actual evidence, not the speculation, but the hard facts that have emerged in the decades since Marilyn's death. Some of these facts are quite disturbing. In the decades following Marilyn Monroe's death, new evidence has emerged that casts serious doubt on the official story. Some of this evidence comes from declassified government documents, some from deathbed confessions, and some from modern forensic analysis of the original crime scene photos. In 1982, 20 years after Marilyn's death, the FBI released 319 pages of documents related to Marilyn Monroe under the Freedom of Information Act. What they revealed was shocking. The FBI had been monitoring Marilyn closely since 1956. They were concerned about her relationships with suspected communist sympathizers and later with the Kennedy brothers. The files contain references to national security issues and potential blackmail situations. One particularly disturbing memo, dated just weeks before Marilyn's death, discusses neutralizing the security threat she potentially posed, while the full context is redacted. The implications are chilling. CIA documents released in the 1990s revealed that the agency was indeed aware of Marilyn's relationship with President Kennedy and considered it a security risk. There are references to monitoring and protective measures that remain largely classified. In 1982, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office reopened the investigation into Marilyn's death. The first official review in 20 years. They brought in new forensic experts to re-examine Thomas Noguchi's original autopsy findings. The new analysis confirmed Noguchi's most disturbing finding. The drugs that killed Marilyn had to have been administered rectally, not orally. This isn't something that typically happens in accidental overdoses or suicides. More importantly, the new experts determined that the amount of drugs in Marilyn's system was so massive that it would have been impossible for her to have administered it to herself. She would have lost consciousness long before reaching a fatal dose. Modern analysis of the witness statements revealed even more inconsistencies than originally noted. Housekeeper Eunice Murray's story changed not just once or twice, but multiple times across various interviews over the years. In some versions, she last saw Marilyn at 8 p.m. In others, it was 10 p.m. Sometimes the light under the door was on when she went to bed at midnight. Sometimes she first noticed it at 3 a.m. Perhaps most significantly, in 1985, a former telephone company employee came forward with copies of Marilyn's phone records from August 4th, records that had supposedly been routinely destroyed. Decades earlier, these records showed that Marilyn's last call was made at 9:30 p.m. to a number in New York City. But according to the official timeline, she was already dead by then, or at least dying from the overdose. The number belonged to a private residence in Manhattan that was frequently used by high-level government officials when they wanted to make calls away from monitored government lines. Who was Marilyn calling at 9:30 p.m.? And what did she say that was so important? The ambulance driver Walter Schaefer's story, initially dismissed as unreliable, gained credibility when other emergency responders came forward with similar accounts. Multiple sources now suggested that Marilyn was still alive when first responders arrived. Contradicting the official story entirely, Schaefer claimed that when they arrived at Marilyn's house around midnight, she was unconscious but breathing. They administered oxygen and were preparing to transport her to the hospital, when they were told to leave by men who identified themselves as federal agents. When they returned hours later, the official discovery time Marilyn was dead. Private investigator Fred Otash's claims about surveillance recordings became more credible. When technical experts confirmed that the surveillance equipment he described was indeed available in 1962 and that bugging Marilyn's house would have been technically feasible before his death in 1992. Otash claimed he had recordings of Robert Kennedy at Marilyn's house on August 4th, engaged in a heated argument about dangerous information Marilyn possessed in 2012. 50 years after Marilyn's death, forensic experts used modern digital analysis techniques on the original crime scene photographs. What they found was disturbing. Several photos showed signs of staging, evidence that items in the bedroom had been moved and rearranged after Marilyn's death, but before the police arrived. The positioning of pill bottles, the arrangement of bed sheets, even Marilyn's body position showed signs of post-mortem manipulation. All of this evidence points to one inescapable conclusion. Whatever happened to Marilyn Monroe on August 4, 1962, it was not the simple probable suicide described in the official report. But if it wasn't suicide, and it wasn't an accidental overdose, then what was it? And more importantly, who was responsible? After examining all the evidence, the witness statements, the forensic findings, the government documents, the timeline inconsistencies, a picture emerges of what likely happened during Marilyn Monroe's final hours. It's not the story that was told to the public in 1906. Based on the most credible evidence, here's what probably occurred. On the afternoon of August 4th, Robert Kennedy did indeed come to Los Angeles. He went to Marilyn's house, not for a romantic encounter, but for a confrontation. Marilyn had been making threats about going public with information about her relationships with both Kennedy brothers. The argument was heated. Marilyn was emotionally unstable, possibly under the influence of prescription drugs she'd taken throughout the day. She was demanding that Robert Kennedy leave his wife, or threatening to expose their affair, or both. More dangerously, she was threatening to reveal government secrets she'd learned through her intimate relationships with both Kennedy brothers, potentially including information about CIA operations, mafia connections, and other classified matters. At some point during this confrontation, a decision was made to sedate Marilyn. Whether this was intended to calm her down or to silence her permanently, we may never know for certain. But the method chosen, administering a massive dose of barbiturates rectally while she was unconscious or semi-conscious, suggests this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a method that would be difficult to detect and would mimic an overdose. When Marilyn died, sometime between 9:30 p.m. and midnight, a cover-up immediately went into motion. Government agents, possibly CIA or FBI, arrived at the house. The scene was cleaned and staged to look like a suicide. Marilyn's diaries and any other incriminating evidence were removed. Her body was repositioned. Pill bottles were arranged too. Support the overdose theory. Housekeeper Eunice Murray, Dr. Ralph Greenson, and Dr. Hyman Engelberg were likely coerced into supporting the official story. They may have been threatened, or they may have genuinely believed they were protecting national security. The inconsistencies in their statements suggest they were trying to balance telling the truth with sticking to a predetermined narrative, an impossible task that led to the contradictions that have puzzled investigators for decades. When ambulance driver Walter Schaefer and his team arrived around midnight and found Marilyn still alive, they were ordered to leave by federal agents. By the time the official discovery was made at 3 a.m., Marilyn had been dead for hours. The cover-up wasn't just about protecting the Kennedy brothers' political careers, though that was certainly part of it. In 1962, America was in the middle of the Cold War. Any scandal that could weaken the presidency was seen as a national security threat. Moreover, if Marilyn possessed information about CIA operations or government connections to organized crime, her death may have been seen as necessary to protect those secrets. The truth about Marilyn Monroe's death was buried under layers of official lies, witness intimidation, and destroyed evidence. But, like all cover-ups, it couldn't completely erase the truth. Marilyn Monroe was not just a victim of an accidental overdose or a tragic suicide. She was likely the victim of a calculated murder designed to protect powerful people and dangerous secrets. The bright star that had illuminated Hollywood for a decade was snuffed out not by her own hand, but by the very forces she had trusted and loved. The official story of Marilyn Monroe's death has never made sense because it was never true. What happened on August 5, 1962 was not a tragedy, it was a crime. And after more than 60 years, it remains unsolved, unpunished, and officially denied. But the truth has a way of surviving, even when powerful people try to bury it. And the truth about Marilyn Monroe's final night is finally coming to light. Marilyn Monroe deserved better than the life she lived and the death she died. She deserved better than the lies that had been told about her final hours. If you found this investigation as compelling as we did, please like this video and share it with others who deserve to know the truth. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. And remember, sometimes the official story is just the first lie. The truth is worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes to find it.